It was an ugly event in a very pretty place.
Prince William Sound was just pristine. It was just America's finest piece of saltwater. It was just a magical place. And to have all that oil floating around in it was kind of like having your 16-year-old daughter raped by the Hells Angels. I mean, I can't tell you how bad it made you feel.
Prince William Sound on the south coast of Alaska, with its crystal clear bays surrounded by snow-covered mountains. The fishing village of Cordova, nestled on the Sound's eastern edge, was spared the oil, but not its impact. Accessible only by air or sea, the town is coming to life again after the cold, quiet winter months.
'88 was one of the biggest fishing years I ever had. And in '89 came along and it all went down the drain.
In the past, locals like Steve Smith would have already been out by now, hauling in the first herring catch of the year, but most boats remain idle. Everything started to change for this community on Good Friday 1989. They call it the day the water died.
We fetched up hard ground here north of Goose Island off Boy Reef. Evidently, leaking some oil, and we're going to be here for a while.
As it turned out, more than 40 million litres of crude oil spewed into the waters and along coastlines for hundreds of kilometres.
We didn't know if we'd ever fish again. We thought maybe our whole water ecology was poisoned to the extent that our whole fishing careers were done.
Longtime fisherman Steve Smith helped with the cleanup.
Lots of grown men were crying. Heartbreaking. It's cost a lot of folks a lot of money and a lot of grief over time. It's not been settled.
The supertanker's owner, Exxon, now ExxonMobil, paid a total of $3.5 billion in cleanup costs, fines and compensation. But people affected by the spill claimed the compensation of about $15,000 each wasn't enough. They sought punitive damages, and in 1994 a jury awarded $5 billion. The oil giant has been fighting that decision ever since.
The issue is, should further punishment be meted out on ExxonMobil in this instance? And we believe, and the business community in this country believes, the answer is no.
Exxon obviously doesn't want to pay any money and obviously is going to make every argument available to it under law to delay that. Every day that Exxon doesn't pay this judgment, it is better off than the day before.
After a series of appeals by Exxon, the punitive damages were reduced to $2.5 billion. That would have meant about $75,000 each for the people in the class action. But the company sought a further review, and now the case has reached the highest court in the land, the increasingly pro-business US Supreme Court, and the fishermen fear they could end up with nothing. Stanford law professor Jeff Fisher has been doing battle for the Alaskans in the Supreme Court.
These are not people looking for a handout in any way. Their livelihoods were devastated by this spill. That's what we proved to a jury at trial, and that's why a jury came back with a very serious award. And all we've spent the last 13 years trying to do is collect on the award that the jury gave them.
Not only was it a great business, it was a great way of life, and it was just ripped away from us. Just went away. Exxon says that everything's coming back and everything's fine, fishermen have been paid. It's a lie. It's an absolute lie.
Mike Maxwell's story, or a very similar one, can be heard time and again in Cordova. Before the oil spill, he had a successful business fishing for herring. But in 1993, 4 years after the spill, the herring disappeared.
There's $50,000 nets sitting all over this town that will never be used again unless something drastic happens out there. It's gone. There were fishermen lost their boats, all their gear, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment, just worthless.
Mike Maxwell lost his summer fishing income and his winter job repairing herring nets.
Boy, the depression that people go through, I've been there myself, years of depression.
He eventually declared bankruptcy.
We were upset about the compensatory money. We didn't think it was enough just because of future damages. No herring coming back mainly, permit and boat devaluation. But we figured that with the large punitive damage award, it would cover what we didn't get in compensatory.
We got paid for that first year when we didn't fish, but that's a long time ago.
And at that point, no one knew
And at the point,
that the herring...
no one knew that the herring were going to be, such a problem.
Steve Smith, who fished salmon as well as herring, managed to keep his business afloat, but he slowly ate into his retirement savings.
My permit was worth $200,000. It's worth nothing now.
How important is it this money comes through?
Well, it's very important, really, but I really don't have much faith in it being anything but a token. I think they're going to cut it down to virtually nothing. I don't think there's a fisherman here that wouldn't rather have fished than get a court settlement.
The herring industry had been worth $12 million a year. The argument continues over whether the oil spill was the sole cause of the decline.
There's plenty of evidence that show that there was damage to both juvenile and adult herring, physical damage. And
Professor Gary Thomas is now based at the University of Miami on the other side of the country. But in the 90s, he went to Alaska to unravel the mystery of the herring decline. He says it started with the oil spill. Then came poor management.
And so you got two things going on. You got oil damaged and oil-affected natural mortality rates that weren't recognized. And second, you got some of the biggest fishing effort and the heaviest exploitation ever after the oil spill. So what else would you expect in 1993 that the fish were knocked down to virtual zero?
ExxonMobil's Vice President of Public Affairs, Ken Cohen, who's been defending the company's position for 19 years now, disagrees.
As herring fisheries, not only in Alaska, but in other parts of the Northwest, are suffering from the effects of a virus that has nothing to do with the spill, and that's a scientific fact.
You know that other scientists dispute that.
Well, all credible science supports what I just told you.
This is just really pretty much a fantasy story. It's not practical. The fish can't disappear like they're telling the public. Their explanation just isn't practical.
To find out more about the recovery of the area's ecosystem, we flew 140 kilometres west to the village of Chenega Bay. After the spill, the local food sources of native Alaskans here became toxic overnight.
This is just covered with oil. There was booms set up all along the shore, all along this whole bay here.
Council President Pete Komkoff then took us to nearby Sleepy Bay, which had oil a metre deep on its shores.
Still smells like oil.
ExxonMobil describes Prince William Sound as healthy, robust and thriving.
Look at this. It's found black gold.
And states there has been no long-term damage. Pete Komkoff, who's lived here all his life, sees a very different picture.
The invertebrates or whatever's living down in the bay here, and somebody else comes along and eats that little critter. You know, it goes up the food chain. So it still worries me somewhat.
But the people of Cordova have taken on more than the world's largest publicly traded oil company. Big business across the US has a vested interest in the result of this case.
There's been a long-standing campaign in the US 10 or 15 years now where business has been trying to persuade the Supreme Court that punitive damages are inherently suspect, and for them to cut back, if not eliminate, on the availability of punitive damages. The Exxon case is the culmination of those efforts.
So is your real concern the precedent it sets?
Yes.
Because punitive damages is something that big business doesn't want to have to deal with?
All business, in fact, all defendants in civil litigation in this country will be closely watching what the court does with this case.
Did you ever think of just paying the punitive damages and moving on for the sake of the company's reputation?
No. We are entrusted with careful stewardship of the shareholders' money. And this standard, the rule of law, and when is it appropriate for punitive damages to be awarded is extremely important.
But it is a PR disaster. Every time this is in the news, your company is the villain, the big corporation, versus the little guy.
If you look at what the company has done since when the spill occurred, and certainly, as I've told you, it was a tragic accident. It's one that...
This is the company line, and Ken Cohen sticks to it.
This is a tragic accident. It's one that we have accepted responsibility when a company is confronted with a tragic incident of this type. It was a tragic accident, one which the company very much regrets.
What do you say to the people who argue that their lives have never been the same? They either went bankrupt, their businesses went down the drain, and they blame Exxon. Do you care?
Oh, of course we care. But again, this is why the courts, all of those issues were before the court. And the court found that the plaintiffs had been, all compensatory damages, including the damages you described, had been met.
As the legal case has dragged on, 20% of the plaintiffs, more than 6,000 people, have died. Many others have suffered depression, marriage breakdowns. The mayor at the time of the spill committed suicide, mentioning the event in a note he left behind. While we were in Cordova, ExxonMobil announced its profits for the first 3 months of the year, almost $11 billion. That has nothing to do with this case, but when the Alaskans consider that their payout would only equal about 3 weeks' profit for the company, it doesn't make them feel any better.
That's what's very depressing, to live in what's supposed to be this wonderful democracy and find out that they've purposely infiltrated the court with pro-business people, and they don't give a damn about justice.
It almost makes us feel like the politicians think we're lying to them about our businesses, about the sound's health, the herring. So it's a pretty tough deal. We have no trust for our corporations in our law system.
Mike Maxwell is working 7 days a week trying to catch up, and he's trying to look forward, not back, but it's a struggle.
If it would have been over with within 4 or 5 years, instead of drug on through 19 years of misery for a lot of people, we probably could have gotten over it. But just the unfairness of the length of the appeals process, Exxon's won.
Morally, have you handled this well?
Yes. We accept this is a tragic incident, one which we took responsibility for.
Today, Cordova's residents have come together to celebrate the town's centenary. They're hoping that the end of legal proceedings will allow them to move on and plan the next phase of their lives. But for some, the day the water died has changed things forever.